Hi everyone, Elsie Jensen here. Today we are going to make a creamy gnocchi soup with some Italian sausage. We're going to prep our two sourdough loaves. We're going to do a traditional, and then I'm going to do a thyme and Gouda and black pepper loaf. And then we'll make our melts, and that's kind of going to be what for our stream. So we're going to start with our soup. So let's get our ingredients prepped up. I'm going to put a little bit of olive oil in my Dutch oven, and we're going to start letting it warm up. And then I'm going to cut in about a pound of Italian sausage. So I buy my Italian sausage in bulk, so I'm just going to cut in these in little pieces. You could use ground Italian sausage if you had it, but these come in like a 20 pack from Costco. So anytime I can buy in bulk, I do. We're a large family. I've got 5 kids, and then I also cook, for my parents. So on a given day, I'm cooking for about 9 people. So bulk is better for us. But I've got a pound of Italian sausage. This is mild, that I'm going to cut in here and start sauteing up, kind of for the base of our gnocchi and Italian sausage soup. This is kind of like a elevated copycat recipe of Olive Garden soup, except it's not as thick, and I think it's just a little bit nicer, a little bit fresher than what you would get there. Although, to be honest, I haven't eaten at an Olive Garden in so long. When I was a kid, Olive Garden was like the cool place, especially because they gave you like those Andes mints as your after dinner thing, and those were so great. And now I'm like, oh, Olive Garden. There's so many better options out there, but you have fond memories from when you're a kid. And I'm sure their breadsticks still probably taste delicious. So we're cutting up. I've got a pound of Italian sausage, and we're going to saute this up in our bowl. Get that away. I'm going to give my hands a quick wash. Okay. And now we're going to cut up 1 yellow onion. So I'm going to cut off the end of each side of the yellow onion. And then I'm going to make a kind of a small slit through just to get this outer layer off, because it is hard to chop up and they're not really good for anything. Then I'm going to chop through my onion, and we're going to do kind of a dice on it, a small dice. This is going to go for making the nice kind of soup base for our creamy Italian gnocchi soup. So we'll chop this guy up. And I'm using a yellow onion. For soups and stews, yellow onions, Valdalia onions, or sweet onions, those are the best onions to use for stews. Red onions are better eaten raw. They have a very mild flavor. And white onions are better in salsas because they've got a peach flavor.
You have a question? Is this recipe upsized for more people?
I'll make a recipe card for it again, and then we always post our videos.
No, is this increased for more people?
Oh yeah, well this is just going to be, this is our lunchtime, so this is really going to be for about 4 to 6 people. A lot of my kids are off at school, so I make their lunches in the morning. This is more for us to have for our lunch, and then I also for my parents for their lunches as well. There you go. So we're going to saute off. I've got my onion cooked up. So when I cook in the dinner, you kind of notice that my meals are typically a lot larger. Like last night, we had herb chicken, and so I had like 8 chicken cutlets for that. So much more than a normal family would eat. I am using, this is like a huge carrot. So I'm peeled 1 carrot. It's so big. This is like equivalent to like 3 carrots. So you would use about 3 carrots for this one. Peeled, and then I'm going to quarter this and dice it up. You don't want your carrot pieces to be too huge. And this is a very massive one, so I'm quartering it, but you could always just have your carrots Or if it was a thin one, you could just leave it as that and just chop it up. But we're gonna prep our vegetables to saute up in here with our Italian sausage. There we go. Always, if you're using like, you know, big carrots, make sure you peel them. The peels of carrots are kind of tough and chewy when you cook them up, and they're not, they don't have as nice of a flavor as like the peeled carrot does. Nice thing. We'll turn this guy down a little bit. And now I'm going to add in my onions with the sausage and chop it up. So you could use ground sausage, which would give you more of a sausage bits in your soup. But I really like to have like the sausage cut up, so it's more like a sausage ball, which would be great for this soup because we have the gnocchi. We're making our creamy Italian gnocchi soup. So you have the sausage ball and you have the gnocchis, which is also a ball. It works really well. But you could also use ground Italian sausage if you wanted.
And you have a question? What brand of knife is that?
This is a Wusthof. So I've actually had it. It's a Wusthof Classic. So it's their basic. I think I got it in a set. I got it for my wedding like 16 plus years ago as like a wedding present. And I love it. I have their knife set and it's over there on the counter. But it works great. It comes with a honing steel, so whenever it gets dull, I just sharpen it up. Okay, we're gonna let that saute for a little bit. I'm gonna add a bit of garlic on, and then we're gonna start prepping our sourdough. Actually, no, we'll just finish chopping up, and then we'll get to prepping that. So I put in about a teaspoon of garlic. If you were using fresh garlic, it'd be 1 to 2 minced up. This is just easier for convenience. Fresh garlic is great, don't get me wrong, but it is a pain to peel and minced up, and this does the job, especially when garlic is not like the star of your show. Now, if your garlic is going to be the star, then yes, fresh garlic is a much better choice. So we're going to add up our diced up carrots. We're going to let that saute this up, and I'm going to prep my celery. And this is kind of our veggie base for our Italian gnocchi soup. When I am using celery, I always use the leaves. The leaves have a nice flavor to them, and they also add a nice color punch to it. Since these stalks are fairly large, I'm going to cut them in half down the middle so we're not getting a huge celery piece. Because you think about like when you're cooking, how you're going to eat it. So with a soup, you don't want to have a huge piece of celery or something like that. You want smaller bits that will fit on your spoon as you eat them. That way you can get more than just one piece of celery in your mouth while you're eating. So we're going to give these kind of a small dice through, including the leaves. I know a lot of people throw the leaves away, but they actually are great for adding extra flavor to your soup, especially to the broth. So I always use my leaves. Beautiful. So I've got my celery chopped up, and we're gonna add this into our mix as well. And we're gonna let that saute, give it a nice stir. I'm gonna let it cook.
You got a comment that someone didn't know you could use the leaves of celery, and they always threw them away.
Yeah, no, they're not as strong in flavor. They're more mild and delicate, but they are great. I love them, and they make your broth and your soup just a little bit prettier as well. So they have a visual effect. We'll be also adding in some spinach, but we're gonna add that in later to our soup, as well as a can of basil, like seasoned diced tomatoes. You could use fresh tomatoes if you want it, but this I think goes really well with our Italian soup. So this is the basil, oregano, and garlic. We're gonna let this saute just a little bit, but while we're doing that, let's start prepping our grilled cheeses. Got my skillet. And we're gonna be using our 2 types of bread. We've got our This is the sun-dried tomato and fresh basil bread. And our basic traditional sourdough. And we're gonna be making a double cheddar and roast beef melt. So we've got sharp cheddar and smoked cheddar. That will go nicely, and then we'll prep our loaves for the other. So I'm going to be making 3 sandwiches today. So I'm gonna cut off 2 slices of our traditional loaf, because my husband's more of a plain Jane versus I'm a little bit more bougie when it comes to it. And now I'm gonna cut off 2 for 2 more sandwiches out of our sun-dried tomato. I always like to do a specialty loaf. I always like to make 2 loaves at a time because sourdough is delicious and not that difficult to make, but we use it a lot. We have it with our dinners, and we also make a lot of grilled cheeses with them. So, there we go. So we've got our sandwiches. Put this right over here. I'm going to give our vegetables a little stir. We're just kind of sauteing them up and letting them get a little flavor out of them. Okay, we're going to spread for our sourdough. We're going to spread a little bit of softened butter on one side of each loaf. And this is so we don't have to spread or put butter on our pan, which will then, if it doesn't touch the bread, it burns. So, and you just need it on one side of each slice of bread, just the side that's going to be touching the skillet. And a little bit of butter goes a long way. So, here. And this, you can smell the sun-dried tomato in this sourdough. It's just so good. We made this one, I think we cooked this one up Friday night, and we're gonna be finishing it off. I was in Memphis over the weekend for a soccer tournament, so I didn't get to do a lot of baking. There we go. And get this side on. I'll put this. So we've got our bases down. Give a little stir, and I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of garlic salt in here just to season up our vegetables. And where's my pepper? A little bit of pepper. So it's about like a teaspoon of garlic salt, not much, you don't need much because we're going to be using bouillon. About a half a teaspoon of black pepper. And I just like to season up our vegetables before we put our broth in. And I'm going to grab some fresh thyme and put in here our soup as well. So grab a couple of leaves going in here. I know I can't wait until the weather is completely nice out there and we're able to use get our herb garden going up. Let me give this a quick rinse. Because in the summer, you know, when you have all those fresh herbs, you can just make such delicious food with them. I do a lot of herb grilled chicken in the summer using like fresh herbs. And the weather here, like today it's getting up to 60 degrees. So it's like giving you that like, oh, it's almost here. But also knowing with being in Tennessee, you have the ability to have another snowstorm in a week or two. So it teases you a lot here. So we're putting in, I got a lot on my hands, some fresh thyme. We're just gonna cook that up and get all of this off of there we go. We're gonna let this season just a little bit and then we're gonna add in some broth. But let's start our sandwiches. So we got our breads buttered on each side. Now we're gonna do our layer of cheeses for our melt. And then while these are cooking up, we'll make our bread. So the trick with our making our grilled cheeses is just don't have your cheese overflow your bread. Otherwise, you're gonna end up with where it's like melting and burning on this skillet. So it's more gonna be like a mosaic. There we go. And this is the smoked cheddar that we're starting out with. So we'll do 1 layer of smoked cheddar on the bottom. We'll put our roast beef in the middle, and then we'll put our cheddar, the other cheddar on top. Okay, so we've got our smoked cheddar here. You give this one more stir. Now, it's got a beautiful fragrant smell. So before I get in, I don't have my skillet on. We'll put that on in just a little bit, but we're gonna put in our diced tomatoes. Now these are the oregano, basil, and garlic. So whole one in there, including the broth. Give this a nice stir. And then we're gonna put in about 4 cups of water in here as well. So let me get my big measuring cup. You could use chicken broth, but I'm going to be using water with bouillon. And we'll want 4 cups. Okay. We're going to pour this in. I'm going to let this start to simmer. And then we're gonna put also a big
You have
scoop.
a question, is that an induction range?
No, this is just a good old electric range. So nothing fancy. I like electric works well. I originally wanted to put gas in, but our house is on a concrete slab, so it was not gonna be a feasible thing. You could do it, but it was gonna be expensive. So electric is. So I put my 4 cups of water in, and I'm putting a big scoop of chicken bouillon into our soup. This is gonna give the saltiness to our soup, so I don't add any extra salt, as well a little bit of flavor. We're gonna let this simmer and cook up. I might put in, since we're gonna be adding the gnocchi and that's gonna need a little broth, I'm gonna put in maybe a cup more of water. There we go. Because I like my soup, it's gonna have a little bit of cream in it, but I don't like it to be a super heavy cream soup. I like it to have that creamy flavor, but not necessarily be super thick for it. I feel like a lot of times people do the cream base and it's such a thick soup, where I like more of a thinner, creamy, delicate soup. So we're gonna let this simmer up and cook. And we're gonna finish up our grilled cheeses and let them start to cook. So we've got our first layer is our smoked cheddar. We're doing 2 on our sun-dried tomato and basil bread. And then we're doing 1 on the traditional plain Jane sourdough. So we're gonna do a nice thin layer of roast beef. Remember, when you're making your sandwiches and you're gonna add meat, you don't wanna go super thick. The thicker it is, the less likely you're gonna melt your cheese before your bread burns. So just a thin layer works. And as long as you're spreading that like flavor out, you don't need a huge amount. If you want a super meaty sandwich, then you're either gonna need to heat up your meat, or I recommend doing it in the oven on like a convection setting, where it can crisp up and warm, so you kind of do an open face grilled cheese instead of on a skillet. And then we're gonna put a layer of sharp cheddar on the top. And again, when we do this, I wanna make sure that I don't have my cheese overflowing the sides of the bread, because then it could burn down on my skillet, and the cheese will burn up faster than your cheese inside can melt. So this is just our sharp cheddar. And I find that cheddar really works well with roast beef. It's even though cheddar has a pretty distinct taste, it blends well with it. Like, I don't find cheddar works as well with like a pastrami or a salami as much, but with roast beef, it's a good one. Okay, and now we're gonna put our top layers.
You have a question? With electric ranges, do you have any tips for help cleaning the food residue off them?
That one's a hard one. They get so dirty so easily. The trick is really clean them up right away before it can really cook in. But a lot of times I will like pour a little bit of water over it and then I let it sit for like warm water and let it sit for a little bit. That way it can loosen up. But you know, there's the razor blade technique where you scrape under with it, and then there's like Ceramic Bright or something like that that you can use to help pick it up. But it is hard. I'm always kind of thing, and the worst is when you get sugar and it melts on there. Oh, it's so hard to get clean. So I've got my roast beef melts on here. I'm cooking them on about a medium to begin with. Once my skillet warms up, they'll start to cook faster, but the first one takes a minute. But I always listen for the sizzle of the butter. Once I can hear it sizzling, I know it's ready for the first turn. Okay, let's start prepping our sourdough loaves. I got my scale. And I fed my starter this morning when I woke up so that it will be nice. It should be nice and bubbly and ready to use. And we're gonna start out, for each one, we're kind of doing just a basic. We start my loaves out, whether it's a specialty or not, because these are inclusions with our basic. 100 grams of active starter. So I'm gonna put my scale on, make sure it's on grams. So many times I've had it on ounces and I was like, I don't know that conversion. And we're gonna use 100 grams of active starter. So starter you have fed in the last like 4 to 8 hours will be the best to use. If it is not active, your bread will not rise.
What's grams to ounces? 28.375?
Something like that. Somebody has to show off over there. Okay, so I've got 100 grams in that one. We're gonna get 100 grams in this one. Because we're gonna be making 2 loaves. Let's see. And mainly I like to make 2 loaves at a time is because sourdough, it is a process that takes a long time. It's not a lot of work. It is a long time. Okay, so I've got 100 grams in here. Now we're gonna add 375 grams of warm water. Make sure your water is warm. That will help it incorporate into the flour much easier. So 375 grams, which is like close to 1.5 cups. But I always use my scale for doing my bread base because I find with baking, for some baking you have to be precise, and you can have a packed cup that can weigh up to 50 grams more in flour than an unpacked cup. You know, there could be an air pocket, so it just can be so variable. So I always like to do my scale, and it doesn't have to be 375 exactly. It's just around the money, you know what I mean? Like sometimes it's 380, or you know, you miss pour or whatnot, but just around that. So, ooh, almost. So that one's 378. Oh, see, pretty close. So we've got our, whoop. There we go. And we're gonna give them a nice little stir. Perfect. And stir. The reason we're doing this is we want our sourdough starter to kind of thin out into the liquid so it will be all over our flour and ready. And then I'm gonna add in my salt. Where did I put it? Oh, here. We're gonna do pepper. So this is my specialty loaf. So I'm gonna do my pepper. It's about a teaspoon of pepper, of ground black pepper. You could use freshly cracked if you wanted. And then I'm gonna go grab my salt over here.
CJ just sent you some lightning bolts.
Oh, thank you. And then I'm gonna use, for each one, it's about 8 to 10 grams of salt, which is about 2 teaspoons. So I'm just kind of doing it in my hand because I kind of know what I want. Perfect. And then I'm gonna give this guy a little stir. Pepper is something that I will mix in at the time with the salt, but my other fresh herbs, I'm going to do them as an inclusion later. Okay, so let's check on our things before we add our flour. Let's see, we're all warming up nicely. I hear a little bit of a sizzle. And in just a second, we'll be ready to flip. Let me grab my bowl. Now we're gonna add 500 grams of unbleached bread flour. You want your flour to be unbleached so that it can kind of continue that like process with the gluten and the fermentation. When you bleach it, it kills all the good stuff. So I will use unbleached bread flour for this. And we need about 500 grams, which is close to around 3 cups. I'm gonna put this one in here, and then I'm gonna flip my sourdoughs because I hear them starting to crispy. This first time around is not for the browning, it's for the heating up the bread and starting to make the nice melting process. So they're not gonna be golden, they're just gonna be warm. That's gonna start to help with the cheese to melt because you gotta melt it through the bread. And now we need 500 grams of flour in this one, which is again about 3 cups. And these just make my standard loaves. So it's, you know, for my standard traditional recipe, it's 100 grams of active starter, 375 grams of warm water, and 500 grams of flour, and 8 to 10 grams of salt, or 2 teaspoons. And that makes my basic loaf super easy. But I always like to do one a little bit bougie and add some extra stuff to it. There we go. And perfect. And give our soup is simmering over here. I'm going to turn it down just a little and give it a nice little stir. We'll add our gnocchi towards the end. Gnocchi only takes a few minutes to cook up, and you don't want to overcook it. Okay, now we're going to whisk in our ingredients. I'm using a dough whisk. If you don't have one of these, but you are into cooking and making breads or any really type of things that uses a spoon, get a dough whisk. They work really well. It just helps incorporate it much easier than a spoon. Like with spoons, they all stuff likes to get stuck on them. Here, it doesn't, it just whisks through easily and then it all kind of falls off. So this is gonna be for our specialty loaf, which is going to have, we're also gonna add thyme and some shredded Gouda cheese to it. So it has some black pepper in it. And then this will be our standard loaf. And we're gonna let it sit and hydrate before we do the first fold, and we'll do that after all of our stuff is done cooking. And we'll fold in our cheese for our specialty loaf and the herbs then. But the key to a really good sourdough loaf is the first 2 hours after you mix it together, you've gotta do your fold and stretch about every 30 minutes. That's gonna help develop the gluten in the bread, which is gonna give you a nice crumb on your bread later, and it's gonna make it yummy and not flat. Okay, so we've got our 2 doughs. We'll let them sit as we work on the rest. Let's see if these guys are ready for their, perfect. So we're gonna flip this. Now, this next set is going to be for crisping up and getting that final browning color on our bread. So we were gonna cook them on each side one more time. Now let's finish up prepping our gnocchi soup. It smells delicious. I'm gonna see if we need to add any more to our broth. And then we'll start adding in our spinach and our gnocchi and our cream. Oh, perfect. It's got the right amount. So I've got my spinach here, my pre-washed spinach. We're gonna put this in a little at a time. If you wanted to, you could put the spinach in whole like this. But I just find that sometimes when you do that, the spinach gets really long and stringy. So I'm just gonna do a little bit of a chop here. And this will just kind of make it so you don't have any really long stringy pieces of spinach in our soup. But the nice thing about spinach is it wilts down pretty fast. So I always like to add it towards the end so that it stays kind of a nice vibrant green versus turning the brownish color after it's been cooked for a while. So we'll mix in our first batch of spinach. And then, there we go. And we'll grab another handful of this. You're gonna use about half a bag of spinach. So I think, how many ounces in a bag? This is so about 4 ounces of spinach. You could use frozen if you wanted to. And that works fine. I feel like fresh spinach always works the best in there. There we go. And we're gonna pour this guy in. And we're gonna give it a nice stir. And then we're gonna do our gnocchi. And last, we'll add in our cream. I always add for any of my cream-based soups at the very end, because if you put it in too soon, your cream can curdle. So I always do it towards the very end of our cooking. I always like to rotate because sometimes I find that my skillet or my oven or stove cooks hotter on this end. So I rotate in cooking so we don't burn anything. So here is just this is a pound of gnocchi. So just gnocchi, if you're unfamiliar with this, is a potato-based pasta. So it just uses kind of like mashed potatoes and flour to make it. But it's delicious and they don't need long to cook. So we're gonna throw our gnocchi in. And this takes about 2 to 3 minutes to cook. But it's nice. I feel like gnocchi doesn't get super soggy in a soup, unlike some noodles. So it holds its form and its, texture when you cook it, which is nice. The worst is if you, when you make chicken noodle soup, if you don't use a good noodle, you can get soggy noodles after a while. That one is looking nice. Perfect. So this one is almost ready. I'm gonna twist mine around. There we go. Now let it start cooking. And we're gonna get our cream ready once we bring this back to a boil. Bring it up, and there we go. So our last thing is we're gonna bring this to a boil, which will take about 2 minutes. Our gnocchi will be done then. We'll add in some cream. We're gonna start with about a half a cup of cream. So I'm gonna go get my measuring cup real quick. And I start with a little bit of cream and I add a bit more. I like the cream to add the flavor and the richness to the soup, but I don't like a super thick soup. If you like your Italian soup a little bit thicker, then just take your cream and mix in a little bit of flour with it. So I'm gonna use about a half a cup of cream. You could mix in maybe like 2 tablespoons to 1/4 of a cup of flour with it, and that would give you a thicker, richer soup. So I know some people love thick soups, and if you want to have a thicker, more hearty soup, just mix in a little bit of flour. But me personally, I love more of the thinner but creamier soups. Okay, so we're gonna start with a half a cup, and then I'll taste my broth and see if we need to add any more to that. So we got half a cup, and we're using heavy whipping cream. If you were gonna use half and half, which is a mixture of heavy cream and milk, what I would do is cut back on your broth. So instead of, I think we used 5 cups in here, use like 4 cups in it, because you'll need a bit more to give you that nice creamy flavor. There go. Let that simmer, and we'll see how this tastes. Perfect, that's all we need. It gives you that rich, creamy flavor, but without going overly bored, like indulgent. Let's check on our sourdoughs right here. Crisping up nicely. You can see my cheddar cheese is starting to melt. These are just about done. So I am going to turn off our skillet here. Look, you can see the gnocchi is all done cooking. It has like floated to the top. That's when you know that they are done cooking. Like I said, gnocchi takes hardly any time. So
you got asked if there's chicken in there?
There is not. We used Italian sausage today, but you could easily use chicken, like a shredded chicken, like rotisserie chicken, or some chicken thighs. But we use Italian sausage because I feel like it goes well with our flavors. Okay, I'm gonna get a little bit of cheese because I love to just sprinkle a little bit of either Parmesan. This is a 6-cheese Italian on it when we are serving it up. So I've got mine there. We grab our plates. And my little cauldron. And let's serve this up. So we've got our lovely, our double cheddar melt with roast beef. And now I'm gonna ladle up some of our gnocchi, our creamy Italian gnocchi soup. Beautiful. Get those gnocchi. And then what I like to do is when we're serving it, I'm gonna sprinkle a little bit of our cheese over it. You don't need too much, but it will just kind of melt down and give you just a bit more richness to the soup, which will be delicious. But this is what we're having for lunch today. Okay, so for those of you joining us, this is our roast beef and cheddar melt and our creamy Italian gnocchi soup. Now let's finish up our loaves over here. So we've got our traditional and we've got our specialty one. So for our specialty one, I'm gonna grab my thyme again. We're gonna be using some fresh thyme and some Gouda cheese. So I'm just gonna pull off some leaves. If you don't have fresh thyme at home, you could literally use, just pull them off over here. You could use dried thyme as well. Fresh thyme, I love it. You see I've kind of used so much thyme off of this plant already. But we're just grabbing the leaves, so I'm kind of just pulling them off like this because we don't want any of those stems in there. So I've got some there. We'll give them a quick rinse. Again, you could also use dried thyme if you wanted. If you're gonna use dried thyme, you're gonna wanna use about a half a tablespoon of dried thyme in our thing. See, I'm trying to get all of these, there we go. So we've got a bunch of leaves right here on our counter, and I'm going to give them a quick rinse. So this is it's gonna be about a tablespoon of fresh thyme. Perfect. Get all of them right there. We're gonna give it a quick rinse. Perfect. And we're gonna add this into our thing. So I'm gonna just break it apart. There. Thyme has a very strong flavor, so you don't need a whole bunch of it to make it in there. And then we're gonna add in about a cup of shredded Gouda. There we go. And then because our mixture is gonna be a little sticky in the beginning, I'm just gonna flour up my hands. And we're gonna kind of do our pull and fold. Pull and fold. And I'm gonna do this since I'm doing an inclusion, I'm gonna do this about 8 times versus on a regular one, I'll do it 4 or 5 times. There we go. And then we've got our first kind of loaf. And in 30 minutes, we're gonna do the exact same thing, a pull and the fold, pull and fold. Okay. And now we're gonna do it with our traditional one. Sourdough's always a little bit sticky in the beginning, so what I like to do is really flour up my hand and pull it and fold it. That way it doesn't stick to you, and it gives it just a little bit more of a base to hydrate in. But sometimes if your sourdough is just so sticky, you just gotta make sure you flour it. And we're doing the pull and stretch. This is really essential to develop the gluten in your sourdough bread. If you don't do this, your bread's not gonna get a nice rise on it. Well, that is done. We'll fold and stretch this in a little bit, and then a couple hours we'll put it in our fridge to do the cold proof. Well guys, thank you for joining us today. We made our lovely creamy Italian gnocchi soup with our roast beef and cheddar melts. And then we did the prep work for our 2 sourdough breads. We were gonna have a black pepper, Gouda, and thyme loaf and our traditional loaf. Well guys, thank you for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We try to do live cooking shows every single day. And feel free to send us a message or comments if you have recipes or cooking questions.